Oh, I'm sorry. Does somebody have?
Nope. Sorry.
Okay, it's fine. I might be hearing just small glitches of people joining the chat, so that's okay. But welcome everyone to our first day of CACE presentations. And this afternoon, I have the pleasure of welcoming and introducing Christina Yongue and Andrea Metcalf. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, Metcalfe.
Metcalf, wonderful. I'm going to give them a brief introduction so you all can get familiar with who they are, and then we'll move right into their presentations. Okay, so we have Christina Yongue first. She has her master's in public health and I don't know what that acronym is, so I'm just going to repeat it, MCHES. And she has managed a NIH research study. You want to care to explain what that is?
Yes. So MCHES is a Master Certified Health Education Specialist, and NIH is National Institutes of Health.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Christina has managed a National Institute of Health research study, which eliminated a racial disparity in cancer care through a community-based participatory research approach. She is currently the Director of Undergraduate Studies and an assistant professor in the Department of Public Health Education at UNCG. So we welcome you, Christina. And next we have Andrea Metcalf, who graduated with her BA in biology, minoring in chemistry and health in society at the UNC Chapel Hill in 2019. Let me repeat that more clearer. Andrea is minoring in chemistry and health in society at the UNC Chapel Hill in 2019. You know, I haven't actually heard of that, health in chemistry and health in society. It's worded kind of.
They're two separate minors. One is in chemistry and one is in health and society.
Got it. Thank you. Andrea has participated in the post-baccalaureate program for biochemistry at UNCG as well. She plans to confront health disparities within the medical field as a representative of marginalized communities. Wonderful. So let us welcome Christina and Andrea. And however you guys want to begin your presentation, you are welcome to.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm so glad to be with you all this afternoon. I am, again, Christina Yongue. I am an alum of UNCG via Florida A&M University. So I'm a Rattler and a Spartan. And I'm also, in addition to representing my faculty position, I am representing my involvement in my church this afternoon, and that's St. James Presbyterian Church. I'm the co-coordinator for the social justice and advocacy ministry there.
And thank you for the introduction. My name, again, is Andrea Metcalf. I am a UNC Chapel Hill alum. I did go to UNCG for my post-bac, and I'm also representing Beloved Community Center.
Right.
Wonderful. I love Beloved Community Center. Oh.
Well, we're going to share with you the purpose of our presentation, which is to go over our volunteer efforts with the Black and Brown Women's Voting Initiative. And so to start off, we wanted to recognize where our paths were crossing and where we were working in individual spaces. So first, wanted to share some of my personal observations and reflections. One of the things I realized before working with Andrea was how health disparities personally and professionally impacted my life. For example, my mother had breast cancer and died of breast cancer. And so that's propelled me to getting into that National Institutes of Health research study. It was at that time that I started working the year after with the Greensboro Health Disparities Collaborative to manage those research studies where we were effective in eliminating a racial disparity. And I did that work, and it's something with the team. It's published on our greensborohealth.org website where you can find more about that. I did that work before coming to UNCG. And when I came to UNCG, I taught the class HEA 350, Race, Ethnicity, and Health. And this is where I met Andrea.
Yeah. And I first recognized health inequalities and inequities in my personal life, mainly through doctor-patient interactions I experienced by my close relatives, specifically through my mom as well. These experiences are what drove me to pursue medicine. I do want to be a representative for disadvantaged communities in healthcare. Once I began my pre-med journey, I was exposed to numerous ways in which inequities and inequalities show up in healthcare. My understanding of health disparities was further expanded upon through both my minor in health and society, as well as a class I took with Professor Yongue. I learned how health outcomes are consequences of systemic injustices and how crucial civic engagement is if our goal is to help ensure positive health outcomes for entire populations of people.
And so we want you to take a flashback to that time when our paths crossed, when Andrea's and my paths crossed. So a flashback to the spring of 2020. You can close your eyes if you want, or you can just visualize as I retell a series of events that happened to the both of us. So if you remember back in 2020, when the COVID pandemic scare hit, all of the classes at UNCG were suspended between March 16th and 20th as we prepare to transition all classes online at that time. In Greensboro, Mayor Nancy Vaughn and the Guilford County Commissioners declared Guilford County in a state of emergency. And so she issued a shelter-in-place executive directive on March 25th. And then around the end of March, the beginning of April, Dr. Fauci, who is the director of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, explained on national television that COVID was hitting the Black and Brown communities and causing more disproportionate deaths due to the already existing racial disparities that we were aware of and highlighted earlier. Dr. Fauci also said that the death rates and intensive care intubations were higher among African Americans because of a greater prevalence of underlying medical conditions, such as diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and asthma. He further said the health disparities have always existed for the African American community, but here again, with this COVID crisis, here is how this is shining a bright light on how unacceptable this is. Then, at the end of the month, the then President Donald Trump goes on TV as well on April 23rd and says that there is a possibility of an injection of a disinfectant that a person infected with the coronavirus can have to deter the virus. Because I'm gonna stop the flashback at that point. So I'm gonna allow us to breathe, because that was a lot for everybody going on at that time, including us. That's a lot coming at us from the former president. There's a lot coming at us that we already were dealing with, and it was just shining a light on racial disparities. So while all of that was going on, this is where my path was crossing with Andrea. She and I were in that class together. I was teaching the class, and before the pandemic hit and we had to go all online, she had spoken to me about wanting to volunteer in health equity projects in the community. And so, but the pandemic limited what we could do. In class, again, before we broke out from the class, we were studying social determinants of health. And one of the social determinants of health that influences the health outcomes and improves the health for all people is the social and community context. And within the social and community context, civic engagement matters and social unity matters. And so we learned that those are strategies for improving the health outcomes for a community. And so then class was over and we worked independently. And so some of the independent work that was going on since December of 2019, I had accepted a role to be a co-coordinator along with Mrs. Lolita Watkins, who I think is here with us in this session today, of our church's social justice and health and advocacy ministry. Our church is St. James Presbyterian Church. It was founded in 1867 by former enslaved and freed African Americans and is now over 150 years old. This is a picture of our social justice ministry. After we did a local community tour and assessment, we invited various representatives from the city of Greensboro so that we can begin new dialogues on faith-based partnerships for social justice work. And we adopted, the Matthew 25 National Presbyterian USA initiative to eliminate racism, eradicate poverty, and revitalize congregations. And so this is how we were forming, and I was already working in this this community organizing and church-based event.
And so for me, I was volunteering with Beloved Community Center before meeting Professor Yongue, and then I continued to intern with them after our class was over. Here you can see a picture of our co-executive director, Rev. Nelson Johnson. For any of you guys who are unfamiliar, the Beloved Community Center's connection to social justice movement started long before its official founding in 1991. It was officially founded by Rev. Barbara Dua, Rev. Z. Holler, and Rev. Nelson Johnson. The Beloved Community Center is a community-based, grassroots, empowerment-oriented organization, and it's rooted in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy of proactive struggles for racial and economic justice, as well as democracy and building a beloved community.
Okay, so for us in our Social Justice Advocacy Committee, we voted in 2020 to prioritize the Get Out the Vote Committee. And this is a subcommittee that was developed in partnership with the Beloved Community Center, who was also working on getting out the vote. So you see in this slide, this is an announcement of our St. James Presbyterian Church Get Out the Vote Committee through the Social Justice Advocacy Ministry, being in partnership with the Beloved Community Center to begin this partnership work initiative. So, however, Andrea and I both had some different hesitations about getting deeply involved in registering people to vote. And so we want to go over that with you, and then we're going to talk about how we overcame those hesitations. So as far as I'm concerned, I was not actively involved in the subcommittee of the Get Out the Vote ministry because of these personal hesitations. Well, for one thing, one of the hesitations was a limitation of time, balancing work, family, and other community engagement responsibilities. But then also, when I was reflecting, I had some hesitancy about other times that I was involved in Get Out the Vote initiatives. I knew that these types of initiatives could leave people disheartened because their favorite candidate wasn't elected. I knew that it could leave people feeling manipulated because they may feel like one political party was just using them for a vote. It may leave people frustrated because a voter candidate who they did elect to office did not end up representing them when they got into office. Or it could leave somebody feeling that voting was not the only solution to our community problems, but holding politicians accountable was more of the solution to our community problems. So I was considering all these hesitations while people were railroading forward with this initiative. I also was attempting to coordinate with some youth who I knew had these similar hesitations to have a dialogue to see, well, what are you facing? I know what my personal hesitations are, but what are your hesitations? But that did not kick off the ground because they had other priorities. And so we were not able to get that pulled together. And so I'm gonna let Andrea share some of her hesitations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I was in conversations with many peers who were all pretty skeptical about replacing a pronounced white supremacist president with a president that will inconspicuously uphold the same structures. I was also hesitant due to the culture of pressuring and criticizing those who don't vote or get involved in Get Out the Vote efforts, without maintaining, the grace and the compassion to recognize that many people are in survival mode and voting isn't necessarily a priority because they don't feel the impacts of federal policy in their daily lives.
Mm-hmm. And so we both considered these hesitations separately and then thought about how to overcome these hesitations. So one of the things that helped me in overcoming my hesitations to get back involved in another voter registration initiative was to reflect on why I do feel pride in having the right to vote. So I thought about one of my sheroes was Fannie Lou Hamer. For those who don't know about Fannie Lou Hamer, she was a civil rights activist. And she lived from 1917 to 1977. She was famously known for saying, "I am sick and tired for being sick and tired." Also, nobody's free until everybody's free. And so those were powerful rallying cries. Not only that, her story compelled me. She was a field secretary with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. And in 1963, some of her and her fellow voters, activists, voter registration activists, were arrested in Mississippi, accused of being disrespectful at a whites-only restaurant. And then when they were in jail, she was beaten severely under police approval. And once she was released, she had even more passion and power to continue to register people to vote. And that story is always stuck with me. So the year after her being severely beaten, and this is her picture over here on the far left, in 1964, she went on to organize more, to get more people registered to vote. She organized the Freedom Summer African American Voter Registration Drive in Mississippi. Also, she kept on going. She went to the Democratic National Convention later that year, and she was a part of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was an integrated group of activists who openly challenged the legality of Mississippi's all-white segregated delegation. So her story definitely reminded me, when I think back about people who've come before me, she stood out to me. Also, what motivated me was I had been through Racial Equity Institute's Latino Challenges to Racism. And from that organizing and what they were teaching there, it showed me the story of Dolores Huerta, who coined the term "Si se puede." And yes, we can. And so knowing these powerful women doing such active work to organize, and Dolores Huerta was a Mexican-American woman. And so these women doing these powerful organizing initiatives, coming and pulling communities together, definitely was a motivation for me. Plus the women who were organizing the Black and Brown Women's Voter Initiative, Mrs. Lolita Watkins and Mrs. Joyce Johnson. Seeing their examples, seeing their passion, seeing all that they're doing also gave me more reason to overcome my hesitation and to show up to support.
And so for me, I reflected on both Ella Baker and Angela Davis's work to make meaning of my participation in the voting initiative. Ella Baker was the executive secretary for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and she organized the founding conference of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Through her quotes, my theory is strong people don't need strong leaders. And I have always thought that what is needed is a development of people who are interested not in being leaders as much as developing leadership in others. I felt, she really emphasized the importance of giving the authority back to the people, which is what the Black and Brown Women's Initiative did. As for Angela Davis, she's known for so many things. She was a professor. She authored Women, Race, and Class, as well as Freedom is a Constant Struggle. She was associated with the Communist Party and actually fired for this. And then she was arrested for charges related to a prison outbreak. But one note that Angela Davis speaks on related to voting is how when you put a label on a frame of time, such as the civil rights movement, it gives it a start date and an end date, which creates this idea of separation between our current struggles and the struggles of our ancestors, when in reality, the fight for liberation is a constant struggle. The right to vote isn't something that was fought for in the past and just hasn't worked and we need to try something new. Rather, the right to vote is, gave our voices a political platform and is a step that we need to uplift and protect as we continue to take further steps in our fight for liberation in other areas of our lives. The Black and Brown Women's Voting Initiative was a platform to uplift and protect our right to vote while also giving the authority back to the people. With this platform, Black and Brown women came together, we exchanged information, we learned from one another, we were heard, we empowered one another, and we were really able to build a beloved community.
And so here we go. We got involved in the Black and Brown Women's Voting Initiative. It started on August the 27th. This is the initial email that was sent out to announce St. James Presbyterian Church, Get Out the Vote Committee, and the Beloved Community Center announces a community-wide discussion to be held on Thursday. This is the first one. And they quote there later in the email, Fannie Lou Hamer, "Nobody's free until everybody's free." And so we want to achieve that for the Black and Brown women and all of us in the community to just be engaged. Again, this is helping everyone's health and improving everyone's health outcomes as well as our conditions. And so this is where me and Andrea's paths crossed again. So when I ran back into Andrea in this community setting, this is when I could take off my professor hat and she could call me Christina because I was joining her committee. She had a committee in this initiative and I just joined under her leadership. So I'm gonna let her talk about that.
So I met with Miss Lolita Watkins and Mrs. Joyce Johnson every Tuesday. We organized the voting initiative meetings that took place every Thursday. On average, I'd say we had about 30 to 35 people attend the Thursday evening Zooms for the duration of the project. However, when we had Margot Shetterly as a guest speaker, who is the author of Hidden Figures, and her message, really encouraged us not to be hidden figures in this, in the voting process. But we had up to 60 participants during that meeting.
Yeah, and that was one that really inspired me too, because we got to interact and just talk with her directly during that session. There were some other sessions that inspired me. We had a gentleman, Reverend C. Bradley Hunt from NAACP, and he shared how easy it was to use their voter database to call people, encourage them to make sure they vote if they're registered to vote, or to make sure their voter registration status is not outdated. We had a speaker from Common Cause to speak on environmental racism, which was also a passion area of mine. And they encouraged us to organize after the election day. So I really was glad to hear that message coming through, because that was part of overcoming my hesitations. And then we also had this flyer here, the community mass meeting with ministers. And so having all of these ministers pour into us and anybody who showed up for this event, how spiritually important it was. There were biblical examples given, and there was, again, a lot of affirmations and encouragement throughout this event. And that also spoke to me because it showed so much support and emphasis on how this will make a difference for us beyond just the voting. So I really appreciated everything that was being coordinated by this initiative.
So I organized the print and social media committee. We wanted to make sure that we were posting voting content daily so we could attract young adults to our efforts and increase their voter engagement in upcoming elections. Christina, she set up a folder in which we would submit content for the following week. The committee would review the content and give feedback, make sure I didn't have any spelling errors, because sometimes I do. Then I would package the weekly content in a social media toolkit and send it out via our contact list to other members within the initiative so that they could post it on their platform, share it with their networks, give it to their youth groups to post, etc. So we were also able to create a Google form where members of other committees could submit their print and social media requests. Through this system, we provided posters to local stores with messages from John Lewis, Michelle Obama, Dolores Huerta, and Carmen Perez. We created flyers for events, infographics for the senior living communities. We contacted local media outlets via the radio and through print efforts. One of my favorite things that we did was create a call to action option where someone in the initiative would alert me to a form of voter suppression or something that could get in the way of the community's ability to vote. We would post the call to action saying, Guilford County, we need your help, explain the issue, and ask people to call the Board of Elections to accommodate or fix whatever inhibitory forces we foresaw within the voting process.
Mm-hmm. And you hear that's a lot of work, everybody. That's a lot of work. And so I was so honored to be under her leadership, to just be supportive of this. So election day came. This is a picture out at 2 of the precincts. I'm in the picture on the right and Ms. Lolita Watkins on the picture on the left. This is a coordinated effort that came from one of the subcommittees of our Black and Brown Women's Voting Initiative. This was a special events committee. So the special events committee on the election day, they organized at 10 of 11 Greensboro voting precincts located predominantly in the African American and Latinx communities. And so what we were organized there to do, as you can see in the pictures, we welcome voters to the polling places. We provided all voters with nonpartisan voter guides, free face masks, hand sanitizers, water, snacks, assisted with transportation, directed voters to the 1-888 number they could call if they felt any trauma or challenges in getting in to vote. We were just there to be supportive and encouraging. And the only reason Andrea's not in the picture because she was busy traveling between the precincts going from one to the other. So I wanted to share some of the overall successes of the entire effort. These were shared by me from Ms. Lolita Watkins. So one of the successes of the effort in the phase one of it is that in partnership with the Democracy North Carolina, they sent out over 1,500 postcards to African Americans in Guilford County removed from the local voting records to encourage them to register and vote. That was a particular effort at the beginning because there were some people who were removed from the voting records, so they were able to contact them. Then with the Churches and Places of Worship Committee, they gained the involvement of 10 church congregations. They organized the Souls to the Polls in coordination with the North Carolina Black Voters Alliance. You just heard Andrea speak about the successes of the Print and Social Media Outreach Committee, where we worked together on that committee. In the Community Civic and Social Groups Committee, they developed a database of women's organizations and of women of color in Greensboro and of Guilford County. So that was a particular success of that committee. And I'm gonna let Andrea share with you some of the other successes.
Yeah, so the Special Events and Programs Committee, which was led by Mrs. Joyce Johnson of Beloved Community Center, we hosted an event on October 17th. It was an early voting expungement clinic in Barber Park. We connected with resources, employers, attorneys, including Special Clean State Clinic with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice to assist ex-felons in clearing their records and registering the vote on site. Our Senior Living Communities Committee contacted 22 nursing homes, 25 adult daycare homes, and 9 adult daycare centers in Guilford County, either by phone and or standardized letter. They offered Democracy North Carolina voting guides to disseminate standardized print information to display in the facilities. The committee really made sure that the Senior Living community had information on voter registration and obtaining and returning their absentee ballot on time. Next, we had our African American and Latin Business Outreach Committee. They contacted nearly 300 businesses via email using the State of North Carolina Historically Underutilized Business List. They gave these businesses educational information and distributed 130 posters encouraging voter turnout. Last but not least, we had our Transportation to the Polls Committee. They established a partnership with the City of Greensboro and a campaign called Move to the Polls. They assisted in the production of a transit guide to the polls, participated in voter registration at Depot, and they disseminated GOTV signs for their partners.
So it's a lot that was going on.
Yes, you can see that the Black and Brown Women's Voting Initiative was busy and successful, so much so that Miss Lolita was inspired to organize the Black and Brown Community Dialogue in partnership with BCC.
And so this was the first event that was held by the Black and Brown Women's Community Dialogue. January 14th started the conversation. We've already gotten through elections, so we continue to mobilize and organize. It featured Dr. Sherelle Barber. She spoke about COVID-19, the virus and the vaccine and the treatments and how that's impacting marginalized communities. Again, very rich dialogue. We had guest speakers along with her on that panel. We had Dr. Bobby Banks, we had Stephanie Baker, together as other organizers in our community to continue the collaborations that were going on and the discussions that need to be had.
Yes, so we'd love for you guys to join us if you'd like to. We're going to continue having these dialogues. Our next one is March 18th, where Dr. Bobby Banks will be back to discuss an equity-based approach to increase awareness about COVID-19 in the African American communities. And then we will be meeting quarterly throughout the rest of the year, and you can see the dates below. They will be posted on the Beloved Community Center website as soon as that is up. But for now, if you guys would like to be added to the Black and Brown Women's Initiative contact list, you can email me at belovedcommunitycenterinterns@gmail.com. I'll put that in the chat as well, and just let me know that you'd like to be on the listserv.
Yeah, and they're going to have great reminder emails.
Yeah.
So we wanted to open up the conversation with you all and just to hear what were your experiences. Have you voted before in the audience here, and why do people have hesitations with voting after all that has been done to make sure we have opportunities, and what are some other things that can help people overcome those hesitations? And why is it important to stay engaged in community dialogue? Okay.
Before we start, I just wanted to make a note. Please use the Q&A as folks cannot see the chat box.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So and I was maybe gonna stop sharing my slides so we can have just more of our faces to be shared and seen. Is that fine?
Sure, if you'd like, for sure.
Okay.
And let's see, you do have a couple of comments that before you, if you wanted already some preset things, let me read off what a couple folks are saying. You have some comments from Pat just saying how awesome your work is and how they have worked really hard against voter suppression and curing North Carolina ballots, and helping also with IOMN North Carolina. And someone is asking if that is still a viable way to volunteer. If you guys have heard of that?
I have not heard of IOMN.
NC, yes.
NC, maybe if she can give us some more what that acronym represents.
Okay.
I know of Institute of Medicine, but I don't know if that's what she's talking about.
I'm not, we'll give her a chance to see if she clarifies on that one.
Okay.
Let me see, thanks for the email and website. You have folks saying Pat is also saying people feel their votes do not count. Also, so many African-American votes were spoiled, and to cure them, voter suppression is alive and well. I think that's just people supporting the things that you were talking about. Yeah. And then you have Dr. Morissette, who's commenting as well. Let me switch back and forth between the two different groups here. Dr. Morissette has put a good comment here that you guys could expand on as well. And did it go away? I'm sorry, that has been working both chat groups here. Okay. My apologies, these chats are running together here. Okay, Dr. Morissette has said, one of the historic and continued ways of disenfranchisement is to promote disinformation. How do you address this aspect of mobilization? Or is there another group that educates that component?
Thank you. Good question. And I think both of us have some examples from this. I was going to bring up the website for the Black and Brown Women's Voting Initiative and how we tried to make sure education was out there. The subcommittee doing this work made sure that the education was out there, particularly around the absentee ballot, how to do that. Maybe Andrea wants to share her experience of helping with that effort. Andrea, you want to share about that?
Sure, yeah. So there was a lot of disinformation around the absentee ballot at the time. So one thing that we made sure to do was get the correct information. And then here at Beloved Community Center, we actually recorded Rev Nelson and Mrs. Joyce, and actually Mr. Brandon as well, who's also a part of the Beloved Community Center. We filmed them filling out the ballot correctly, making a point to address the parts that were unclear. And we posted the video on our website. And yeah, and we made an announcement to everybody to let them know that that was there. There was also times during the voting initiative meetings after the presentations where we allowed people to bring their concerns. You know, I heard this, and we would usually come to a conclusion, do some research and figure it out then and there.
And I just remember how intentional all the presenters were for that issue of misinformation. That was the whole reason of bringing people together on the Zoom to hear from an expert of a particular part of voting and what was happening at the time. In addition to the voter guides being given out.
Related to misinformation, I'm sure you guys experienced a lot of that with your, I took a note here on it, print and social media outlet. Discuss a little bit of that. How was it trying to maintain just the divisiveness and misinformation on social media while you're trying to encourage and promote young folks to vote and to stay up to date?
One of the big things about divisiveness, well, I'll just say we just tried to make sure that our messages were the opposite. Always trying to promote unity through our messages. While also, there would be some comments like, are you sure about this? Or, just different things that would come up as a concern from the young community responding to our media posts. We always just made sure to answer them in a unifying way, paying particular attention, I guess, to the language that we use.
And I remember when I was reposting and retweeting the things that Andrea had helped develop, just to tag on, encourage people to register to vote, encourage you to register to vote. It wasn't who you should vote for. That wasn't the message. The message was just register to vote, exercise your right to vote, get out the vote. So like as she's saying, a counter to other messages that were out on social media, just continual reminders, because of so much. And if you remember all those commercials on the radio, I mean, you couldn't get away from messages about the election when that was going on. So all we had to do was the reminder messages, get involved, get involved. And that's how we try to counter anything out there.
Wonderful. We have another question here. For myself, this is an anonymous comment. For myself and a lot of other people, I see the hesitance to vote because of the perception that regardless of who is in office, the condition of Black and Brown people seem to stay the same. I believe that a shift towards community development is more significant, as well as focusing on local voting for mayors in public office, etc. What are your thoughts, Christina and Andrea?
You want me to go take it?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so that was also a hesitancy that I shared during the presentation. I think, what I said about Angela Davis's words really is how I would answer this question, and that they're not two separate things. I think that, our ancestors did fight for that right to vote, and it is our job to uplift and protect that right, while also doing, focusing on local elections and building community. I don't think it's an either or, I think it's a both and. And, I would agree. I think that sometimes we can get so focused on the debate of, this president versus that president, when it is true that I feel like what it really strengthens us is focusing on our community building. And that's why I think the get out the vote efforts can be impactful.
And the only thing I'll add is that sometimes because it's a presidential national election going on and getting so much attention, getting people involved in that, because there's so much on the news and commercials about it, you can still have the conversation. Well, let's focus back on local. Let's focus back on local and continue to couple those messages together so that that's not lost as a part of the organizing conversation.
Absolutely. I think that education, I forgot which one, well, both of this is all around education, but I think that's important as well. A lot of young folks are unaware who these local officials are. And if there are any Black and Brown officials running and representatives and what they stand for. So I would absolutely agree that just persistence and education would help in that, in that capacity.
And I would say too, about the voter education guides, how important those were, because in the guides, it shows the pictures of the people running for office on the local levels, and all the way, through all the levels, but even some of the commissioners running. So those are really helpful for that purpose of knowing who are these people,
And I would say too, even our involvement within the community throughout this initiative, we were able to meet a lot of different young folks, especially like through the expungement clinic and through, I can't remember the name of one event we had, but it definitely drew younger folks. But even in that, it was like, there's all these different other organizations you can get involved in that target local elections that are ran by younger folks. So I think that helping people get aware of what is all available in Greensboro can be impactful in that way.
Absolutely. You guys mentioned something about, boy, I think with the Latinx initiative, you guys mentioned something about historically underutilized business lists that you tapped into. That's a unique component that I haven't heard much for voting initiatives. Care to share a little bit more about that?
Mhm. Yes, so, and just from observation on the side, some of my church members were deeply involved in that initiative of the Underlies Businesses Initiative. I think Mildred Powell was leading that subcommittee. And so, yes, so there is a network of underutilized businesses or businesses led by people of color or of women. And so the city of Greensboro keeps a track of those lists. And so because they need to, for proposal's sake, they have to represent how many underutilized businesses are they using in some of their proposals for the city. So there is a database, and these are businesses that are a wealth of asset because of the trust, because of their being able to cater to their audiences. And so the effort was to make sure they're included, and there are places where these voter guides could be distributed. I know from what we were sharing, the posters were put up in these businesses so that all of their customers could be aware of it. And that's how we were able to reach our audience through the business relationship. And so it's all about trust. It's all about relationships and trust, and where do we find those networks? So that was one of the important organizing opportunities.
Speaking of finding those networks, what was for both of you, what did you find most challenging in having to, I guess, access these networks and really try to collaborate on so many different things you guys have?
Well, I would say that, that was something more that Miss Lolita Watkins and Mrs. Joyce Johnson handled. I wish they could be on the panel to kind of address that. And Miss Lolita Watkins, she is in the audience, so maybe she can answer that for you. But yeah, they did all that hard work. We just got out the information.
And I was going to lift up you, Andrea. One of the challenges was coordinating the request among all the committees. So because Andrea had this Google request form, what kind of print media do you need? I mean, she was creative in meeting with Ms. Lolita Watkins and Ms. Joyce Johnson every week, but there were all these other members. So a challenge was trying to coordinate everybody's effort. So because she had this Google form, what do you need? When do you need it? What kind of audiences is for? She could craft a certain targeted campaign message for just getting out the vote. So as far as a challenge and coordination, how do you meet the demands? The Google form came up with help with that challenge.
For sure.
Wow.
And then also just the challenge of the reason why they had all those committees was because it was that many challenges. And so because we needed somebody to coordinate special events, had somebody working on that, needed somebody to coordinate reaching out to the businesses, had somebody working on that. So and I would say even in our committee, just to speak to that, I know we had probably about 4 or 5 people on our subcommittee. Us meeting together was a challenge, making sure we could all show up to be supportive. And that's why we tried to help with the people putting the things in the folder so we could have a central location to pull the things from. Organization is sometimes a challenge, but we coordinated that under good leadership.
Thank you, Christina.
Wow. Thank you. Speaking of good leadership, Lolita has the combo.
All right.
So we have a question from her.
Okay.
Lolita asks, what are local African-American young male leaders sharing or discussing in how we move forward in preparing for our local upcoming elections? And part 2, are you aware of any discussions taking place right now?
I would say I am involved in a lot of those conversations with some of the local leaders, youth leaders. There is an organization called We the People. They are led by 2 females and 1 male. They are currently discussing which candidates they're going to get behind for the local elections. I think that, you know, we need to invite them in for more conversation, just because I feel like there's, you know, a lot of education that needs to happen between groups. BCC itself is a nonpartisan organization, so I can't really speak on us or that, but yeah, that's what I would say.
And to her question about males, I'm just aware of other men being a part of other organizing efforts, and that some of the conversations are going on there. For instance, there's the Guilford Anti-Racism Alliance that's organized for people who have attended racial equity trainings. And so people who have gone to those trainings can plug into the Guilford Anti-Racism Alliance and have conversations there. And those are multiracial groups, and they have different caucuses. There's people of color caucus and a white caucus, and then they have a joint caucus. And so there's conversations going on in those meetings on a regular basis. But people voice their opinions there when it's local elections, when it's national elections, and men and women, and then figure out how to partner and what to do about it and strategize with others. Some of our volunteers of the Black and Brown Women's Voting Initiative were participating in that as well. And so the conversations are circling, but that's the point of the dialogue. But I appreciate the question.
So that is a complex question. So thank you for taking the stab at that.
Yeah.
Regina.
Yeah, because I think that, oh, well, go ahead.
No, go ahead before we move to the
just to have a conversation. I do think that's one of the challenges, is reaching the young Black men, young men of color. I knew there, even among some of the students at UNCG, there was some hesitancy. There were some people who were first in line to vote when it was early voting, and there were some who didn't vote at all. And I can't say that there was a male group per se where there was a discussion about this, but I do know there were some young men at UNCG who didn't vote, and I wasn't aware until later. But yes, there's still some hesitancy, but it's through conversation. Like, back again, that's why I'm so grateful to have this dialogue opportunity coming forward in the upcoming months, where we can bring the conversation out of the classroom into the community, hearing everybody's voices, and that way I hope will attract people.
Absolutely. With community organizing, is very important to kind of try to break down that wall between the university and the community, because how are we supposed to really make proactive results if we can't even connect? So I really, that's so important.
Yeah.
We have another question from Regina. It says, if you could have your wish list fulfilled, how could the university, the academic community, be of support to your efforts?
Oh, good. Have a wish list. Oh, let's dream.
Dream big.
Right. If we can have a wish list, how could the university support these efforts? Well, I think, like what you were saying, Tiera, about the partnership, making sure people on campus are aware of these community dialogue spaces and how it's a safe space, especially now that's virtual. So that maybe there are some listservs where more people at the university are aware of this community dialogue versus having the students to have to sign up themselves, that the community could share the opportunity with some group of students, maybe all the people who've come to the CACE conference, or all the people who are following the CACE conference, that that would be, I think, a helpful thing for the advertisement.
Absolutely, especially with it being virtual right now. Absolutely.
And I do think, I don't know if Andrea has something to say, but another thing is working, so the university does have some spiritual connection to different agencies in the Greensboro community, and I'm not sure that all of the churches and organizing, even in that flyer that we showed, the list of ministers there, that students on campus at UNCG are aware of those resources right here in Greensboro. And so some way of, as far as a dream and wish list, that students who maybe are not from Greensboro realize these faith-based organizations are open to supporting them. If there's some misinformation, people want to come to events at the Beloved Community Center, that they don't find out their last year in college, that they find out from the beginning, oh, it's stuff in Greensboro to do, then just go down Wendover. That's not all, or stuff to do. There's actually community organizing going on where you can just talk and be yourself and ask questions and get answers. And more than that, Andrea, right, get some mentorship. We were kind of talking about just Southern networks in Greensboro and just how great it is to know that there are some people who are willing to answer your questions. And I think that's a dream on a wish list that some students don't realize. There's family out here in Greensboro to be supportive of you.
Mm-hmm.
So, did you want to add, Andrea?
I mean, I think Christina covered it. Definitely normalizing, the way we uplift on campus organizations, uplifting, grassroots organizing organizations within the community would be huge.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna keep dreaming though.
Yeah. I mean, hey, Martin Luther King, right?
There we go. keep dreaming and putting action. Dreaming and action.
And that's the key. Action behind the dream.
There we go. There we go.
Lolita has another question. She says, are there any specific issues in our community that you feel candidates need to address as we begin to prepare for political forums this fall?
Good one. Well.
She really asks some critical questions.
That's awesome. I wish we could open up all the people here. This is what usually we might be able to do, but I understand the restrictions. So yes, well, again, this is just talking about it, but because of the hardship of COVID and the pandemic and how that's impacted Black and Brown communities, there's going to be so many ripple effects that need to be addressed on a local level. So almost kind of mirroring the organization of the Black and Brown Women's Voting Initiative, we need for our local officials to explain, show how there's going to be better healthcare access, whether that's still the vaccinations going on, how is that going to be organized for particularly our Black and Brown communities. And not only the vaccinations, but the treatment, the prevention. How are we going to reduce the cost for ways to still interact in safe ways? So how are masks still going to be supplied in the Black and Brown communities? How are transportation going to be organized to support those who are essential workers and getting to their jobs from Black and Brown communities, maybe across the community and across the city? How are the costs going to be lowered? How are we going to help those with childcare needs that they maybe had just enough to cover for 6 months of a pandemic, and now it's going on to a year and a half? What can, on the local level, what kind of reimbursement packages can be organized? These are some of the real things, and I'm talking from young people, from young workers population, from the students needing support. Students are needing, we've had more people that need to use the UNCG pantry. There's students are having to make decisions on where they're gonna live. And that's taken away, that's a Greensboro issue because of the students being residents in Greensboro. So our local politicians need to look at ways to support the campuses in conjunction with where students living, and then in the Black and Brown communities. So just a few things. We're gonna keep holding them accountable.
And I'd like to take the opportunity to kind of uplift Guilford for All's work in this area. They're currently creating a people's platform. They are addressing everything. Well, I volunteered specifically for the health and wellness community, but they have a housing.
Did you say, I'm sorry, Andrea, did you say Guilford for All?
Yes, Guilford for All. So they're building a people platform for the Carolina Federation. They're going to be submitting suggestions. We did research, talking to people throughout the community like what they want changed in regards to health and wellness, education, housing, incarceration. I think there were a couple other issues that I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, we've already got all of those results, and they are going to be releasing that platform pretty soon.
Yeah, I second that. Guilford for all.
Guilford for all. Thank you. I just shared that in the chat for folks if they want to keep a note of it. Are there any, before we come to an end, you guys shared so much wonderful information. Is there a place that folks can go to keep up with this or to stay a part of it? I know you guys had that slide that had a couple of organizations on it, or infants. Lolita says, great presentation, and your work in putting this together is appreciated. You have other comments saying great presentation, awesome work, thank you for sharing. And cheers, the audience.
I was thinking you put up the email address, right?
I had put it in the chat. I was directed to use the Q&A, but I actually don't even know how to use the Q&A box.
Okay.
It's okay. I don't think they can reply, but if you put it in the chat to all panelists and attendees, they can see it.
Okay, well, I put it in the chat pretty early on, so I'll put it again though. Just in case.
If you could put that again, and any social media sites or anything where people can just stay involved and keep up with upcoming initiatives, please share.
Okay, and I'll probably try to put those in the chat, but you certainly can look for both of our organizations on Facebook.
Yes.
And that's like a regular weekly place to plug into for worship services, where there's announcements of community events being said during the services, and those are on replay, so you can watch them anytime and kind of see, well, what were last week's announcements? And some people just follow church announcements, and so those are available. You can go to the Beloved Communities website as well, as Andrea was saying, that's going to be updated as well. So those are places you can go if you're not yet ready to email, but email will bring the message straight to you.
Absolutely. Andrea, make sure that you share that with all panelists and attendees. Let me know. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so they can see it. Wonderful. Wonderful. Because we want to plug you into everyone. Wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful. Are there any, this has been so informative for everyone, especially after a very sensitive time, and we're in a very critical place right now with voting and people of color and women representation. So I want to thank you guys, AADS and myself, for participating and presenting such valuable research. Are there any final conclusions or thoughts or reflections either of you want to share?
Well, I would just say, I would just say it's very natural to have hesitation with getting involved in community initiatives or even voter registration, but there's always a reason to overcome that, and you gain so much from community engagement. And I just encourage people to continue having conversations, continue to bring your authentic self to those conversations so that you can grow and learn. That's how Andrea and I were able to talk outside of class.
For sure. And I would just kind of add, when you get to a point where you're like, should I do this? Should I do that? To kind of declutter your mind, just bring it back to the basics of what serves the people, and work out of a love ethic. And I think that if you keep that at the forefront, you'll always make the right choice.
Such value. I'm putting both of those in the chat because I thought both of that was, just real and practical for people, young folks who are definitely having to deal with a lot of these things. So thank you both. Declutter your mind and be authentic.
Work from a love ethic. I love that too.
Oh,
that's it. That's the best thing. Work from a love ethic.
Oh,
you'll never go wrong.
There you go.
You won't. And I'm going to put that as well for a final conclusion. Well, Andrea and Christina, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you again for sharing your research, and I'm going to stay in tuned as well. And I hope the audience members do, to keep up with all the work you're doing. I do have one final question before we end. How do you think this initiative will present itself in the future? What do you think it'll look like 4 years from now?
Well, again, we have 4 years of a new administration to follow nationally, and then we're going to keep looking at these local North Carolina, even, you know, what's going to happen in North Carolina in the next 4 years is going to be crucial for us to follow. So I do think we'll see if we can get people to come into these dialogues. That'll help us to know what the next 4 years will look like. But we can only improve as long as we stay engaged and to hold people accountable.
Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping it continues to serve as a platform to educate, as well as, you know, just dignifying the voices of our Black and brown women in our communities, offering a space to build community. So.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful conclusion. And I guess we'll stay hopeful.
That's all we got.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Andrea and Christina. And thank you to the audience for attending. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your CACE presentations today.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. You're very welcome.